Hello, this is Mayor Gavin Buckley. Welcome to City Hall and happy holidays. And I hope you enjoy this gift to you from the City of Annapolis of a reading of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol.
A Christmas Carol in prose.
Being a ghost story of Christmas.
By Charles Dickens.
Preface. I have endeavored in this ghostly little book to raise the ghost of an ideal, which shall not put my readers out of humor with themselves, with each other, with the season, or with me.
May it haunt their houses pleasantly, and may no one wish to lay.
Their faithful friend and servant, C.D., December 1843. Marley was dead. To begin.
There is no doubt whatever about that.
The register of his burial was signed by the clergyman, the clerk, the undertaker, and the chief mourner.
Scrooge signed it, and Scrooge's name was good upon change for anything he chose to put his hand to.
Old Marley was dead as a doornail.
Scrooge knew he was dead.
Of course he did. How could it be otherwise? Scrooge and he were partners for I don't know how many years.
Scrooge was his sole executor, his sole administrator,
His sole assign, his sole residuary legatee.
His sole friend and sole mourner.
There is no doubt that
Marley was dead. This must be distinctly understood, or nothing wonderful can come of the story we are going to relate.
Scrooge never painted out old Marley's name. There it stood years afterward above the warehouse door, Scrooge and Marley.
The firm was known as Scrooge and Marley. Sometimes people new to the business called Scrooge Scrooge, and sometimes Marley, but he answered to both names. It was all the same to him.
Oh, but he was a tight-fisted hand at the grindstone, Scrooge. A squeezing, wretched, grasping, scraping, clutches, covetous old sinner.
Hard and sharp as flint, from which no steel had ever struck out generous fire. Secret and self-contained, and solitary as an oyster.
The cold within him froze his old features, nipped his pointed nose, shriveled his cheeks, stiffened his gait, made his eyes red, his thin lips blue, and spoke out shrewdly in his grating voice.
A frosty rime was on his head and on his eyebrows and his wiry chin. He carried his own low temperature always about with him. He iced his office in the dog days and didn't thaw it 1 degree at Christmas.
Nobody ever stopped him in the street to say with gladsome looks, "My dear Scrooge, how are you?" No beggars implored him to bestow a trifle. No children asked him what it was o'clock.
But what did Scrooge care? It was the very thing he liked, to edge his way along the crowded paths of life, warning all human sympathy to keep its distance.
Once upon a time, in all the good days of the year, on Christmas Eve, old Scrooge sat busy in his counting house.
The door of Scrooge's counting house was open, that he might keep his eye on his clerk, who in a dismal little cell beyond, a sort of tank, was copying letters.
Scrooge had a very small fire, but the clerk's fire was so much smaller that it looked like one coal.
But he couldn't replenish it, for Scrooge kept the coal box in his own room, and so surely as that clerk came in with the shovel, the master predicted that it would be necessary for them to part.
Wherefore, the clerk put on his white comforter and tried to warm himself at the candle, in which effort, not being a man of strong imagination, he failed.
A Merry Christmas, Uncle! God save you!
Cried a cheerful voice. It was the voice of Scrooge's nephew, who came upon him so quickly that this was the first intimation he had of his approach. "Bah," said Scrooge. He had so heated himself with the rapid walking in the fog and frost, this nephew of Scrooge's, that he was all in a glow. His face was ruddy and handsome, his eyes sparkled, and his breath smoked again.
Christmas a humbug, Uncle. You don't mean that, I'm sure.
I do. Merry Christmas. What right have you to be merry? What reason have you to be merry? You're poor enough.
Oh, come then, what right have you to be dismal? What reason have you to be morose? You're rich enough.
Scrooge, having no better answer ready on the spur of the moment, said, "Bah," followed up by,
Don't be cross, Uncle.
What else can I be when I live in such a world of fools as this? Merry Christmas. Out upon Merry Christmas. What's Christmas time to you but a time for paying bills without money? A time for finding yourself a year older but not 1 hour richer. A time for balancing your books and having every item in them through a round dozen months presented dead against you. Oh, if I could work my will, every infant who goes about with mere Christmas on his lips should be boiled in his own pudding and buried with a stake of holly through his heart, he should.
Uncle.
Nephew, keep Christmas in your own way. Let me keep it in mine.
Keep it, but you don't keep it.
Well, let me leave it alone then. Much good it may do you. Much good it has ever done you.
There are many things from which I might have derived good, by which I have not profited, I dare say. And Christmas among the rest, but I am sure I have always thought of Christmas time as a good time, a kind, forgiving, charitable, pleasant time, the only time I know of in a long calendar of the year when men and women seem by one consent to open their shut-up hearts freely and to think of people below them as if they really were fellow passengers to the grave, and not another race of creatures bound on other journeys. And therefore, Uncle, though it has never put a scrap of gold or silver in my pocket, I believe that it has done me good, will do me good, and I say, God bless it.
Let me hear another sound from you, and you'll keep Christmas by losing your situation. You're quite a powerful speaker, sir. I wonder you don't go into Parliament.
Don't be angry, Uncle. Come, dine with us tomorrow.
Scrooge said that he would see him. Yes, indeed, he did. He went the whole length of the expression and said that he would see him in that extremity first.
But why? Why?
Why did you get married?
Because I fell in love.
Because you fell in love. Good afternoon.
Nay, Uncle, but you never came to see me before that happened. Why give it as a reason for not coming now?
Good afternoon.
I want nothing from you. I ask nothing of you. Why can we not be friends?
Good afternoon.
I'm sorry with all my heart to find you so resolute. We have never had a quarrel to which I have been party, but I have made the trial in homage to Christmas, and I'll keep my Christmas humor to the last. So Merry Christmas, Uncle.
Good afternoon.
And a Happy New Year.
Good afternoon.
His nephew left the room without an angry word, notwithstanding.
There's another fellow, my clerk, with 15 shillings a week and a wife and family talking about a Merry Christmas. I'll retire to bed.
This lunatic, in letting Scrooge's nephew out, had let 2 other people in.
They were portly gentlemen, pleasant to behold, and now stood with their hats off in Scrooge's office. They had books and papers in their hands, and they bowed to him.
It's Scrooge and Marley's, I believe.
Said one of the gentlemen, referring to his list.
Have I the pleasure of addressing Mr. Scrooge or Mr. Marley?
Mr. Marley has been dead these 7 years. He died 7 years ago, this very night.
We have no doubt that his liberality is well represented by his surviving partner.
At this festive season of the year, Mr. Scrooge.
It is more than usually desirable that we should make some slight provision for the poor and
Who
destitute.
suffer greatly at this present time. Many thousands are in want of common necessary.
Hundreds of thousands are in want of common comfort, sir.
Are there no prisons?
There are plenty of prisons.
And the union workhouses, are they still in operation?
They are. Still, I wish I could say they were not.
The treadmill and the poor laws are in full vigor.
Both very busy, sir.
Oh. I was afraid from what you had said at first that something had occurred to stop them in their useful course. I'm very glad to hear it.
A few of us are endeavoring to raise a fund.
To buy the poor some meat, some drink, means of warmth. And we choose this time.
Because it is a time of all others when want is keenly felt.
And abundance rejoices.
What shall we put you down for?
Nothing.
You wish to be
Anonymous.
I wish to be left alone. Since you asked me what I wish, gentlemen, that is my answer. I don't make merry myself at Christmas, and I can't afford to make idle people merry. I help support the establishments I have mentioned. They cost enough. And those who are badly off must go there.
Many can't go there.
And many would rather die.
If they would rather die, they had better do it. and decrease the surplus population. Besides, I don't know that.
But you might know it.
It is not my business. It is enough for a man to understand his own business and not interfere with other people's. Mine occupies me constantly. Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Seeing clearly that it would be useless to pursue their point, the gentlemen withdrew.
The owner of one scant young nose, gnawed and mumbled by the hungry cold as bones are gnawed by dogs, stooped down at Scrooge's keyhole to regale him with a Christmas carol. But at the first sound of
"Oh, bless you, merry gentlemen, ain't nothing you despise,"
Scrooge seized the ruler with such energy of action that the singer fled in terror, leaving the keyhole to the fog, an even more congenial frost.
Scrooge resumed his labors with an improved opinion of himself and a more facetious temper than was usual with him.
At length, the hour of shutting up the counting house arrived.
With an ill will, Scrooge dismounted from his stool and tacitly admitted the fact to the expectant clerk in the tank, who instantly snuffed out his candle and put on his hat.
You want all day tomorrow, I suppose?
If quite convenient, sir.
It is not convenient, and it's not fair. If I were to stop half a crown for it, you think yourself ill-used.
The clerk smiled faintly.
And yet you don't think me ill-used when I pay a day's wages for no work?
The clerk observed that it was only once a year.
A poor excuse for picking a man's pocket every 25th of December. But I suppose you must have the whole day. We'll be here all the earlier the next morning.
The clerk promised that he would, and Scrooge walked out with a growl.
Scrooge took his melancholy dinner in his usual melancholy tavern, and having read all the newspapers and beguiled the rest of the evening with his banker's book, went home to bed.
He lived in chambers which had once belonged to his deceased partner, and they were gloomy, sweet rooms.
The building was old enough now, and dreary enough, for nobody lived in it but Scrooge, the other rooms being all let out as offices.
Now, it is a fact that there was nothing at all particular about the knocker on the door, except that it was very large.
It is also a fact that Scrooge had seen it night and morning during the whole residence in that place.
Let it also be borne in mind that Scrooge had not bestowed one thought on Marley since his last mention of his 7 years dead partner that afternoon.
And then, let any man explain to me, if he can, how it happened that Scrooge, having his key in the lock of the door,
Saw in the knocker, without its undergoing any intermediate process of change.
Not a knocker, but a face.
Marley's face.
With a dismal light about it, like a bad lobster in a dark cellar.
It was not an angry or ferocious look, but looked at Scrooge as Marley used to look at him, with ghostly spectacles turned up on his ghostly forehead.
The hair was curiously stirred as if by breath or hot air, and though the eyes were wide open, they were perfectly motionless.
As Scrooge looked fixedly at this phenomenon, it was a knocker again. He said, and closed the door with a bang. Bang, bang,
The
bang.
sound resounded through the house like thunder. Every room above, every cask in the wine merchant's cellar below appeared to have a separate peal of echoes of its own.
Scrooge was not a man to be frightened by echoes. He fastened the door and walked across the hall and up the stairs, slowly too, trimming his candle as he went.
Up Scrooge went, not caring a button for its being very dark. Darkness is cheap, and Scrooge liked it.
But before he shut his heavy door, he walked through his rooms to see that all was right. He had just enough recollection of that face to desire to do that.
Sitting room, bedroom, lumber room, all as they should be.
Nobody under the table, nobody under the
A
sofa.
small fire in the grate, spoon and basin ready, and a little saucepan of gruel on the hob.
Nobody under the bed, nobody in the closet.
Nobody in his dressing gown, which was hanging up in a suspicious attitude against the wall.
Dissatisfied, he closed his door and he locked himself in. He double-locked himself in, which was not his custom.
Thus, secured against surprise, he took off his cravat, put on his dressing gown and slippers and his nightcap, and sat down before the fire to take his gruel.
His glance happened to rest upon a bell, a disused bell that hung in the room and communicated for some purpose now forgotten with a chamber in the highest story of the building.
It was with great astonishment and with a strange, inexplicable dread that as he looked, he saw that bell begin to swing.
It swung so softly at the outset that it scarcely made a sound. But it soon started to ring out loudly, and so did every bell in the house.
This might have lasted half a minute or a minute, but it seemed an hour. The bells ceased as they had begun together.
And they were succeeded by a clanking noise deep down below, as if some person were dragging a heavy chain over the casks in the wine merchant's cellar.
The cellar door flew open with a booming sound. Boom! Boom!
Then he heard the noise much louder on the floors below, then coming up the stairs and then coming straight toward his door.
It's humbug still. I won't believe it.
His color changed, though, when without a pause it came through his heavy door and passed into the room before his eyes.
Marley's ghost.
The chain he drew was clasped about his middle. It was long and wound around him like a tail.
And it was made of cash boxes, keys, padlocks, ledgers, deeds, and heavy purses wrought in steel.
How now?
Said Scrooge, cold and caustic as ever.
What do you want with me?
Much.
Marley's voice, no doubt about it.
Who are you?
Ask me who I was.
Who are you then? You're particular for a shade.
In life I was your partner, Jacob Marley.
Can you sit down?
I can.
The ghost sat down on the opposite side of the fireplace as if he were quite used to it.
You don't believe in me.
I don't.
What evidence would you have of my reality beyond that of your senses?
I don't know.
Why don't you doubt your senses?
Because little things affects them. A slight disorder of the stomach makes them cheats. You may be an undigested bit of beef, a blot of mustard, a crumb of cheese, a fragment of underdone potato. Yes, there is more of gravy than of grave about you, whatever you are.
Scrooge was not much in the habit of cracking jokes, nor did he feel in his heart by any means waggish then. The truth is that he tried to be smart as a means of distracting his own attention and keeping down his terror.
Humbug, I tell you, humbug.
On this, the spirit raised a frightful cry and shook its chain with such a dismal and appalling noise that Scrooge held on tight to his chair to save himself from falling in a swoon.
Mercy, dreadful apparition, why do you trouble me?
Man of the worldly mind, do you believe in me?
I do. I must. But why do spirits walk the earth, and why do they come to me?
It is required of every man that the spirit within him should walk abroad among his fellow men and travel far and wide. And if that spirit goes not forth in life, it is condemned to do so after death.
But you are fettered. Tell me why.
I wear the chain I forged in life. I made it link by link, yard by yard. Is its pattern strange to you? Or would you know that weight and length of the strong cord you bear yourself? It was full as heavy and as long as this 7 Christmas Eves ago. And you have labored on it. It is a ponderous chain.
Scrooge glanced about him on the floor in the expectation of finding himself surrounded by some 50 or 60 fathoms of iron cable, but he could see nothing.
Jacob. Oh, Jacob Marley. Tell me more. Speak comfort to me, Jacob.
I have none to give. I cannot rest. I cannot stay. I cannot linger anywhere. My spirit never walked beyond our counting house. Mark me. In my life, my spirit never roved beyond the narrow limits of our money-changing home. And weary journeys lie before me.
7 years dead, and traveling all the time. You travel fast.
On the wings of the wind.
You might have gotten over a great quantity of ground in 7 years.
The ghost, on hearing this, set up another cry and clanked its chain so hideously in the dead silence of the night that the ward would have been justified in indicting it for a nuisance.
Blind man, not to know that ages of incessant labor by immortal creatures for this earth must pass into eternity before the good of which it is susceptible is all developed. Not to know that any Christian spirit working kindly in its little sphere, whatever it may be, will find its mortal life too short for its vast means of usefulness. Not to know that all opportunity is misused. Yes, such was I. Oh, such was I.
But you were always a good man of business, Jacob.
Business, mankind was my business. The common welfare was my business. Charity, mercy, forbearance, and benevolence were all my business. The dealings of my trade were but a drop of water in the comprehensive ocean of my business.
It held up its chain at arm's length, as if that were the cause of all its unavailing grief, and flung it heavily upon the ground again.
Hear me, my time is nearly gone.
I will, but pray, don't be hard. Pardon me, don't be flowery, Jacob, pray.
I'm here tonight to warn you that you have yet a chance and a hope of escaping my fate. A chance and a hope of my procuring Ebenezer.
You were always a good friend to me.
Thank you. You will be haunted by 3 spirits.
Scrooge's countenance fell.
Is that the chance and hope you mentioned, Jacob?
It is.
I think I'd rather not.
Without their visit, you cannot hope to shun the path I tread. Expect the first tomorrow when the bell tolls 1.
Couldn't I take them all at once and have it over, Jacob?
Expect the second on the next night at the same hour, the third upon the next night when the last stroke of 12 has ceased to vibrate. Look to see me no more, and look that for your own sake you remember what has passed between us.
The apparition walked backward from him, and at every step it took, the window raised itself a little, so that when the spectre reached it, it was wide open.
Scrooge became sensible of confused noises in the air, incoherent sounds of lamentation and regret, wailings inexpressibly sorrowful and self-accusatory.
The spectre, after listening for a moment, joined in the mournful dirge, and floated out upon the bleak, dark night.
Scrooge closed his window and examined the door by which the ghost had entered.
And it was double locked, as he had locked it with his own hands, and the bolts were undisturbed.
He tried to say humbug, but stopped at the first syllable.
And, being from the emotion he had undergone, or the fatigues of the day,
or his glimpse of the invisible world, or the dull conversation of the ghost,
or the lateness of the night, much in need of repose,
went straight to bed without undressing, and fell asleep upon the instant.
When Scrooge awoke, it was so dark that looking out of the bed, he could scarcely distinguish the transparent window from the opaque walls of his chamber.
He was endeavoring to pierce the darkness with his ferret eyes when the chimes of a neighboring church struck the 4 corners. So he listened for the hour. To his great astonishment, the heavy bell went on from 6 to 7, from 7 to 8, and regularly up to 12. Then stopped.
12. It was past 2 when he went to bed. The clock was wrong. An icicle must have got into the works.
Why, it isn't possible,
Said Scrooge.
that I kind of slept through the whole day and fall into another night.
Scrooge thought and thought and thought, and over and over and over, could make no sense of it.
The more he thought, the more perplexed he was. And the more he endeavored not to think, the more he thought.
Was it a dream or not?
He resolved to lie awake until the hour was past, and considering that he could no more go to sleep than go to heaven, this was perhaps the wisest resolution in his power.
Quarter past.
Dong, dong, ding, dong.
Half past. A quarter to it.
Dong, dong, ding, dong.
The hour itself, and nothing else.
He spoke before the hour bell sounded, which it now did with a deep, dull, hollow, melancholy.
1.
Light flashed up in the room upon the instant, and the curtains of his bed were drawn.
The curtains of his bed were drawn aside, and Scrooge, starting up into a half-recumbent attitude, found himself face to face with the unearthly visitor who drew them.
It was a strange figure, like a child, yet not like a child, as like an old man.
Its hair, which hung about its neck and down its back, was white as if with age.
And yet the face had not a wrinkle in it, and the tenderest bloom was on the skin.
It had a branch of fresh green holly in its hand, and in singular contradiction of that wintry emblem, had its dress trimmed in summer flowers.
Are you the spirit, sir, whose coming was foretold to me?
Scrooge.
I am.
Who and what are you?
I am the ghost of Christmas past.
Long past?
Inquired Scrooge, observant of his dwarfish stature.
No, your past. The things that you will see with me are shadows of the things that have been. They will have no consciousness of us.
Scrooge then made bold to inquire what business brought him there.
Your welfare.
Scrooge expressed himself much obliged, but could not help thinking that a night of unbroken rest would have been more conducive to that end.
The spirit must have heard his thinking, for it said immediately,
Your reclamation, then. Take heed.
it put out its strong hand as it spoke, and clasped him gently on the arm.
Rise and walk with me.
As the words were spoken, they passed through the wall and stood upon an open country road with fields on either side.
The city had entirely vanished. Not a vestige of it was to be seen.
The darkness and the mist had vanished with it, for it was a clear, cold, wintry day with snow upon the ground.
Good heavens! I was bred in this place. I was a boy here.
The spirit gazed on him with mildness.
He was conscious of 1,000 odors floating in the air, each one connected with 1,000 thoughts, and hopes and joys and cares long, long forgotten.
Your lip is trembling. And what is that I see upon your cheek?
Scrooge muttered with an unusual catching in his voice that it was a pimple, and begged the ghost to lead him where he would.
They walked along a long road, Scrooge recognizing every gate and post and tree, until a little market town appeared in the distance with its bridge, its church, and winding river.
Some shaggy ponies now were trotting towards them, with boys upon their backs who called to other boys in country gigs and carts driven by farmers.
All these boys were in great spirits and shouted to each other until the broad fields were so full of merry music that the crisp air laughed to hear it.
These are but shadows of things that have been. They have no consciousness of us.
The jocund travelers came on, and as they came, Scrooge knew and named them, every one.
Why was he rejoiced beyond all bounds to see them?
Why did his cold eye glisten, and his heart leap up as they went past?
Why was he filled with gladness when he heard them give each other Merry Christmas as they parted at the crossroads and byways for their several homes?
What was Merry Christmas to Scrooge? Out upon Merry Christmas. What good had it ever done him?
The school is not quite deserted. A solitary child, neglected by his friends, is left there still.
Scrooge said he knew it, and he saw it.
They left the high road by a well-remembered lane, and soon approached a mansion of dull red brick.
It was a large house, but one of broken fortunes, for the spacious offices were little used. Their walls were damp and mossy, their windows broken, and their gates decayed.
Nor was it more retentive of its ancient state within. For entering the dreary hall and glancing through the open doors of many rooms, they found them poorly furnished, cold, and vast.
There was an earthy savor in the air, a chilling bareness in the place, which associated itself somehow with too much getting up by candlelight and not too much to eat.
They went, the ghost and Scrooge, across the hall to a door at the back of the house.
It opened before them, and disclosed a long, bare, melancholy room, made barer still by lines of plain deal forms and desks.
At one of these, a lonely boy was reading near a feeble fire, and Scrooge sat down upon a form and wept to see his poor, forgotten self as he used to be.
The spirit touched him on the arm and pointed to his younger self, intent upon his reading.
I wish.
Scrooge muttered, putting out his hand from his pocket and looking about him after drying his eyes with his cuff.
But it is too late now.
What is the matter?
Nothing. There was a boy singing a Christmas carol at my door last night. I should like to have given him something. That's all.
The ghost smiled thoughtfully and waved its hand, saying as it did so,
Let us see another Christmas.
Scrooge's former self grew larger at the words, and the room became a little darker and more dirty.
The panels shrunk, the windows cracked, fragments of plaster fell out of the ceiling, and the naked laths were shown instead.
But how all this was brought about, Scrooge knew no more than you do.
He only knew that it was quite correct, that everything had happened so, that there he was,
alone again.
When all the other boys had gone home for the jolly holidays.
The door opened, and a little girl, much younger than the boy, came darting in and putting her arms about his neck and often kissing him, addressing him as her dear, dear brother.
I have come to bring you home, dear brother.
Said the child, clapping her tiny hands and bending down to laugh.
To bring you home, home, home.
Home, little Fan,
returned the boy.
Yes, home for good and all. Home forever and ever. Father is so much kinder than he used to be that home's like heaven. We're to be together all the Christmas long and have the merriest time in all the world.
You are quite a woman, little Fan.
She clapped her hands and laughed and tried to touch his head, but being too little, laughed again and stood on tiptoe to embrace him.
Then she began to draw him in her childish eagerness toward the door.
And he, nothing loath to go, accompanied her.
Always a delicate creature, whom a breath might have withered.
Said the ghost.
But she had a large heart.
So she had. You're right, I will not gainsay it, Spirit, God forbid.
She died a woman, and had, as I think, children.
One child.
True. Your nephew.
Scrooge seemed uneasy in his mind and answered briefly.
Yes.
Although they had but that moment left the school behind them, they were now in the busy thoroughfares of a city.
It was made plain enough by the dressing of the shops that here, too, it was Christmas time again.
The ghost stopped at a certain warehouse door and asked Scrooge if he knew it.
No, I was apprenticed here.
They went in. At sight of an old gentleman in a Welsh wig, Scrooge cried out in great excitement.
Oh, why, it's old Fezziwig. Bless his heart, it's Fezziwig. Alive again.
Old Fezziwig laid down his pen and looked up at the clock, which pointed to the hour of 7.
He rubbed his hands, adjusted his capacious waistcoat, laughed all over himself from his shoes to his organ of benevolence,
and called out in a comfortable, oily, rich, fat, jovial voice.
Yo-ho there! Ebenezer! Dick!
Scrooge's former self, now grown a young man, came briskly in, accompanied by his fellow apprentice.
Dick Wilkins, to be sure.
Said Scrooge to the ghost.
Bless me, yes, there he is. He was very much attached to me, was Dick. Poor Dick, dear, dear.
Yo-ho, my boys!
Fezziwig.
No more work tonight. Christmas Eve, Dick. Christmas, Ebenezer. Let's have the shutters up before a man can say Jack Robinson. Clear away, my lads, and let's have lots of room here.
Clear away. There was nothing they wouldn't have cleared away or couldn't have cleared away with old Fezziwig looking on. It was done in a minute.
Every movable was packed off, as if it were dismissed from public life forevermore.
The floor was swept and watered, the lamps were trimmed, fuel was heaped upon the fire.
And the warehouse was as snug and warm and dry and bright a ballroom as you would desire to see upon a winter's night.
In came a fiddler with a music book, and went up to the lofty desk and made an orchestra of it, and tuned like 50 stomachaches.
In came Mrs. Fezziwig, one vast, substantial smile.
And in came 3 Miss Fezziwigs, beaming and lovable.
In came the 6 young followers whose hearts they broke.
In came all the young men and women employed in the business.
In came the housemaid with her cousin, the baker. In they all came, one after another.
Some shyly, some boldly.
Some gracefully, some awkwardly.
Some pushing, some pulling.
In they all came, anyhow and everyhow.
And away they all went, 20 couples at once.
Hands half round and back again the other way, down the middle and up again.
Round and round in various stages of affectionate grouping. Old top couple always turning up in the wrong place.
New top couple starting off again. As soon as they got there.
All top couples at last, and not a bottom one to help them.
When this result was brought about, old Fezziwig, clapping his hands to stop the dance, cried out,
Well done!
And the fiddler plunged his hot face into a pot of porter, especially provided for that purpose.
There were more dances, and there were forfeits.
And more dances, and there was cake.
Next, there were great pieces of cold roast.
And there were great pieces of cold boiled, and there were mince pies.
Plenty of beer. Oh, and when the clock struck 11, this domestic ball broke up.
Mr. and Mrs. Fezziwig took their stations, one on either side of the door.
And shaking hands with every person individually as he or she went out, wished him or her a Merry Christmas.
A small matter,
Said the ghost.
to make these silly folk so full of gratitude.
Smaller?
Why is it not? He has spent but a few pounds of your mortal money, 3 or 4 perhaps. Is that so much that he deserves this praise?
It isn't that, Spirit. He had the power to render us happy or unhappy, to make our service light or burdensome, a pleasure or a toil. Say that his power lies in words and looks, in things so slight and insignificant that it is impossible to add and count them up, what then? The happiness he gives, it is quite as great as if it had cost a fortune.
He felt the spirit's glance, and he stopped.
What is the matter?
Nothing particular.
Something, I think.
No. I should like to be able to say a word or two to my clock just now. That's all.
My time grows short. Quick.
This was not addressed to Scrooge or to anyone whom he could see, but it produced an immediate effect, for again, Scrooge saw himself.
He was older now, a man in the prime of his life.
His face had begun to wear the signs of care and avarice.
There was an eager, greedy, restless motion in his eye, which showed the passion that had taken root, and where the shadow of the growing tree would fall.
He was not alone, but sat by the side of a fair young girl in a morning dress, in whose eyes there were tears.
It matters little.
She said softly.
To you very little. Another idol has just placed me, and if it can cheer and comfort you in time to come, as I would have tried to do, I have no just cause to grieve.
What idol has displaced you?
He rejoined.
A golden.
This is the even-handed dealings of the world. There is nothing on which it is so hard as poverty, and there is nothing which professes to condemn with such severity as the pursuit of wealth.
You fear the world too much. All your other hopes have merged into the hope of being beyond the chance of sordid reproach. I have seen your nobler aspirations fall off one by one until the master passion, gain, engrosses you, have I not?
What then? Even if I have grown so much wiser, what then? I am not changed towards you.
She shook her head.
Am I?
Our contract is no longer one. It was made when we were poor and content to be so. And you were changed. When it was made, you were another man.
I was a boy.
Your own feeling tells you that you are not what you are, and I am. That which promises happiness when we were one in heart is fraught with misery now that we are two. How often and how keenly I have thought of this, I will not say. It is enough that I have thought, and I can release you.
Have I ever sought release?
In words, no, never.
In what then?
In a changed nature, in an altered spirit, in another atmosphere of life, another hope as its great end. If you were free today, tomorrow, yesterday, can even I believe that you would choose a dowerless girl? For choosing her, do I not know that your repentance and regret would surely follow? I do, and I release you with a full heart for the love of him you once were.
She left him, and they parted.
Spare,
Said Scrooge.
show me no more. Conduct me home. Why do you delight in torturing me?
I told you that these were the shadows of things that have been, that they are what they are. Do not blame me.
Remove me. I cannot bear it. Leave
He
me.
was conscious of being exhausted,
Take me back.
overcome by an irresistible drowsiness.
Haunt me no longer.
Further, of being in his own bedroom.
He had barely time to reel to bed before he sank into a heavy sleep.
Awaking in the middle of a prodigiously tough snore and sitting up in bed to get his thoughts together, Scrooge had no occasion to be told that the bell was again upon the stroke of one.
Now, being prepared for almost anything, he was not by any means prepared for nothing. And consequently, when the bell struck one and no shape appeared, he was taken with a violent fit of trembling.
He noticed a blaze of ruddy light streaming from below the door to his sitting room. He got up softly and shuffled in his slippers to the door.
It was his own room, there was no doubt about that.
But it had undergone a surprising transformation. The walls and ceiling were so hung with living green that it looked a perfect grove, from every part of which bright gleaming berries glistened.
Crisp leaves of holly, mistletoe, and ivory reflected back in the light as if they were so many little mirrors that had been scattered there.
And such a mighty blaze went roaring up the chimney as that dull petrification of a hearth had never known in Scrooge's time, or Marley's, or many winter seasons gone.
Heaped upon the floor to form a kind of throne where turkeys, geese, game,
Poultry, brawn, great joints of Meat,
Sucking pigs, long wreaths of sausages.
mince pies, plum puddings, barrels of oysters.
Red-hot chestnuts, cherry-cheeked apples,
Juicy oranges, luscious pears, immense 12th cakes.
and seething bowls of punch that made the chamber dim with their delicious steam.
In easy state upon this couch, there sat a jolly giant, glorious to see.
Who bore a glowing torch, in shape not unlike Plenty's horn.
And held it up, high up, to shed its light on Scrooge as he came peeping round the door.
Come in,
Exclaimed the ghost.
come in. And know me better, man.
Scrooge entered timidly and hung his head before the spirit.
He was not the dogged Scrooge he had been, and though the spirit's eyes were clear and kind, he did not like to meet them.
I am the ghost of Christmas present.
Said the spirit.
Look upon me. You have never seen the like of me before.
Never.
The ghost of Christmas present rose.
Spirit, conduct me where you will. I went forth last night on compulsion, and I learnt a lesson which is working now. Tonight, if you have aught to teach me, let me profit by it.
Touch my robe.
Scrooge did as he was told and held it fast.
The room and its contents all vanished instantly, and they stood in the city streets upon a snowy Christmas morning.
And there emerged from scores of by-streets, lanes, nameless turnings, innumerable people carrying their dinners to the bakers' shops.
The sight of these poor revelers appeared to interest the spirit very much, for he stood with Scrooge beside him in a baker's doorway, and taking off the covers as their bearers passed, sprinkled incense on their dinners from his torch.
Spirit,
Said Scrooge after a moment's thought.
I wonder you, of all the beings in the many worlds about us, should desire to cramp these people's opportunities of innocent enjoyment.
I,
Cried the spirit.
You would deprive them of their means of dining every seventh day, often the only day on which they consent to be dined at all, wouldn't you?
I,
You seek to close these places on the seventh day, and it comes to the same thing.
I seek.
Forgive me if I am wrong. It has been done in your name, or at least that of your family.
There are some upon this earth of yours who lay claim to know us and who do their deeds of passion, pride, ill will, hatred, envy, bigotry, and selfishness in our name, who are as strange to us and all our kith and kin as if they had never lived. Remember that. Charge their doings on themselves, not us.
Scrooge and the ghost passed on, invisible, straight to Scrooge's clerks.
And on the threshold of the door, the spirit smiled and stopped to bless Bob Cratchit's dwelling with the sprinkling of his torch.
Think of that. Bob had but 15 bob a week himself,
He pocketed on Saturdays but 15 copies of his Christian name.
and yet the ghost of Christmas present blessed his simple four-room house.
Then up rose Mrs. Cratchit, dressed out but poorly in a twice-turned gown,
But braided ribbons, which are cheap and make a goodly show for sixpence.
and she laid the cloth, assisted by Belinda Cratchit, second of her daughters, also brave and ribbon.
While Master Peter Cratchit plunged a fork into a saucepan of potatoes.
And now, two smaller Cratchits, boy and girl, came tearing in, screaming that outside the baker's they had smelt the goose and known it for their own.
And basking in luxurious thoughts of sage and onion, these young Cratchits danced around the table and exalted Master Peter Cratchit to the sky.
While he blew the fire until the slow potatoes, bubbling up, started knocking loudly at the saucepan lid to be let out and peeled.
Whatever has got your precious father then?
Said Mrs. Cratchit.
And your brother, Tiny Tim. And Mother weren't as late last Christmas by half an hour.
Here's Mother, Mother!
Cried the two young Cratchits.
I blush your heart alive, my dear, how late you are.
Said Mrs. Cratchit, kissing her a dozen times and taking off her shawl and bonnet for her with officious zeal.
We had a deal of work to finish up last night and had to clear away this morning, Mother.
Well, never mind, so long as you are come. Sit ye down before the fire, my dear, and have it warm. Oh, Lord bless you.
No, there's Father coming, cried the two young Cratchits, who were everywhere at once. Hi, Mother, hi!
So Mother hid herself, and in came little Bob. Bob, with at least 3 feet of comforter, exclusive of fringe, hanging down before him.
And his threadbare clothes darned up and brushed to look seasonable, and Tiny Tim upon his shoulder.
Alas for Tiny Tim. He bore a little crutch and had his limbs supported by an iron frame.
Why, where's our Martha?
Cried Bob while looking around.
Not coming.
said Mrs. Cratchit.
Not coming? Not coming upon Christmas Day?
Martha didn't like to see him disappointed, if it were only in joke.
So she came up prematurely from behind the closet door and ran into his arms.
While the two young Cratchits hustled Tiny Tim and bore him off into the wash-house, that he might hear the pudding singing in the cotton.
And how did little Tim behave?
Oh, as good as gold and better. Somehow he gets thoughtful sitting by himself so much, and thinks the strangest things you ever heard. He told me, coming home, that he hoped the people saw him in the church because he was a cripple, and it might be pleasant for them to remember, upon Christmas Day, who made lame beggars walk and blind men see.
Bob's voice became tremulous when he told of this, and trembled more when he said that Tiny Tim was growing strong, hardy.
His active little crutch was heard upon the floor, and back came Tiny Tim before another word was spoken, escorted by his brother and sister to his stool before the fire.
And while Bob, turning up his cuffs, as if, poor fellow, they were capable of being made more shabby, compounded some hot mixture in a jug with gin and lemons, and stirred it round and round and put it on the hob to simmer.
Master Peter and the two ubiquitous young Cratchits went to fetch the goose, with which they soon returned in high procession.
Mrs. Cratchit made the gravy hissing hot. Master Peter mashed the potatoes with incredible vigor.
Belinda sweetened up the applesauce, and Martha dusted the hot plates.
Bob took Tiny Tim beside him in a tiny corner at the table.
The two young Cratchits set chairs for everybody, not forgetting themselves, and mounting guard upon their posts, crammed spoons into their mouths, lest they should shriek for goose before their turn came to be helped.
At last the dishes were set on and grace was said.
It was succeeded by a breathless pause, as Mrs. Cratchit, looking slowly all along the carving knife, prepared to plunge it into the breast.
When she did, and when that long-expected gush of stuffing issued forth, one murmur of delight arose around all the board.
And even Tiny Tim, excited by the two young Cratchits, beat on the table with the handle of his knife and feebly cried,
"Hurrah!"
There never was such a goose. Bob said he didn't believe there ever was such a goose cooked.
Its tenderness and flavor, its size and cheapness were the themes of universal admiration.
Eked out by applesauce and mashed potatoes, it was a sufficient dinner for the whole family.
Indeed, as Mrs. Cratchit said with great delight, surveying one atom of bone upon the dish, they hadn't ate it all at last.
Yet, everyone had had enough, and the youngest Cratchits in particular were steeped in sage and onion to the eyebrows.
At last the dinner was all done, the cloth was cleared, the hearth was swept, and the fire made up.
The compound in the jug being tasted and considered perfect.
Bob served it out with beaming looks, while the chestnuts on the fire sputtered and cracked noisily.
Then Bob proposed,
"A Merry Christmas to us all, my dears. God bless us,"
which all the family re-echoed.
"God bless us, everyone,"
said Tiny Tim, the last of all. He sat very close to his father's side upon his little stool.
Bob held his withered little hand in his, as if he loved that child and wished to keep him by his side, and dreaded that he may be taken from him.
"Spirit," said Scrooge, with an interest he had never felt before.
Tell me if Tiny Tim will live.
I see a vacant seat in the poor chimney corner, and a crutch without an owner carefully preserved. If these shadows remain unaltered by the future, the child will die.
No, oh no, kind spirit, say he will be spared.
These spirits, these shadows remain unaltered by the future. None others of my race will find him here. What then? If he be like to die, he had better do it, and decrease the surplus population.
Scrooge hung his head to hear his own words quoted by the Spirit, and was overcome with penitence and grief.
Oh man, if man you are in heart, not adamant, forbear that wicked cant, until you have discovered what the surplus is, and where it is. Will you decide what men shall live, what men shall die? It may be that in the sight of heaven you are more worthless and less fit to live than millions, like this poor man's child. Oh, God, to hear the insect on the leaf pronouncing on the too much life among his hungry brothers in the dust.
Scrooge bent before the ghost's rebuke, and trembling cast his eyes upon the ground. It was a great surprise to Scrooge, while thus engaged, to hear a hearty laugh.
It was a much greater surprise to Scrooge to recognize it as his own nephew's, and to find himself in a bright, dry, gloomy room.
With the spirit standing smiling by his side and looking at that same nephew with approving affability.
It is a fair, even-handed, noble adjustment of things, that while there is infection in disease and sorrow, there is nothing in the world so irresistibly contagious as laughter and good humor.
When Scrooge's nephew laughed, holding his sides, rolling his head, twisting his face into the most extravagant contortions.
Scrooge's niece by marriage laughed as heartily as he.
And their assembled friends, being not a bit behindhanded, roared out lustily.
He said that Christmas was a humbug as I live.
Cried Scrooge's nephew.
He believed it, too.
More shame for him, Fred,
Said Scrooge's niece indignantly. Bless those women, they never do anything by halves. They are always in earnest.
He's a comical old fellow, that's the truth. Not so pleasant as he might be. However, his offenses carry their own punishment, and I have nothing to say against him.
I have no patience for him.
Observed Scrooge's niece. Scrooge's niece's sisters and all the other ladies expressed the same opinions.
Oh, I have.
Said Scrooge's nephew.
I am sorry for him. I couldn't be angry with him. I've tried. Who suffers by his ill whims? Himself always. Here he takes it into his head to dislike us, and he won't come and dine with us. What's the consequence? He don't lose much at the dinner.
Indeed, I think he loses a very nice dinner.
Interrupted Scrooge's niece. Everybody else said the same.
And they must be allowed to have been competent judges because they had just had dinner.
And with the dessert upon the table, we're clustered round the fire by lamplight.
After tea, they had some music, for they were a musical family and knew what they were about when they sung a glee or catch, I can assure you.
But they didn't devote the whole evening to music. There was first a game of blind man's buff. Of course there was.
Scrooge's niece was not one of the blind man's buff party, but was made comfortable with a large chair and a footstool in a snug corner, where the ghost and Scrooge were close behind her.
But she joined in the forfeits, and loved her love to admiration with all the letters of the alphabet.
Likewise, at the game of how, when, and where, she was very great.
And, to the secret joy of Scrooge's nephew, beat her sisters hollow.
There might have been 20 people there, young and old. They all played.
And so did Scrooge.
For wholly forgetting in the interest he had in what was going on, that his voice made no sound in their ears.
He sometimes came out with his guess quite loud, and very often guessed quite right, too.
For the sharpest needle was not sharper than Scrooge, blunt as he took it in his head to be.
The ghost was greatly pleased to find him in this mood, and looked upon him with such favor that he begged like a boy to be allowed to stay until the guests departed.
But this, the spirit said, could not be done, and they were again upon their travels.
Much they saw and far they went, and many homes they visited, but always with a happy end.
The spirits stood beside sick beds, and they were cheerful. On foreign lands, and they were close at home.
By struggling men, and they were patient in their greater hope. By poverty, and it was rich.
In almshouse, hospital, and jail, in misery's every refuge.
Where vain man in his little brief authority had not made fast the door and barred the spirits out.
He left his blessing and taught Scrooge his precepts.
It was a long night, if it were only a night. But Scrooge had his doubts of this, because the Christmas holidays appeared to be condensed into the space of the time they passed together.
It was strange, too, that while Scrooge remained unaltered in his outward form, the ghost grew older, clearly older.
Are all spirits' lives so short?
My life upon this globe is very brief. It ends tonight.
Tonight?
Tonight at midnight.
Dong, dong, ding, dong.
Hark, the time is drawing near.
Forgive me if I am not justified in what I ask, but I see something strange and not belonging to yourself, protruding from your skirts. Is it a foot or a claw?
Might be a claw, for the flesh there is upon it.
Was the spirit's sorrowful reply.
Look here.
From the foldings of its robe, it brought forth two children, wretched, abject, frightful, hideous, miserable.
They knelt down at its feet and clung upon the outside of its garment.
Oh man, look here. Look. Down here.
They were a boy and a girl, yellow, meager, ragged, scowling, and wolfish, but prostrate too in their humility.
Where graceful youth should have filled their features out and touched them with its freshest tints.
A stale and shriveled hand, like that of age, had pinched and twisted and pulled them into shreds.
Where angels might have sat enthroned, devils lurked, and glared out menacing.
No change. No degradation, no perversion of humanity in any grave throughout all the mysteries of wonderful creation has monsters half so horrible and dread.
Scrooge started back, having them shown to him in this way. He tried to say they were fine children.
But the words choked themselves rather than be parties to a lie of such enormous magnitude.
Spirit, are they yours?
Scrooge could say no more.
They are man's,
Said the spirit, looking down upon them.
and they cling to me, appealing from their fathers. This boy is ignorance, this girl is want. Beware them both in all of their degree, but most of all beware this boy. For on his brow I see that which is doom, unless the writing be erased. Deny it.
Cried the spirit, stretching out its hand toward the city.
Slander those who tell it yea. Admit it for your factious purposes and make it worse and bide the end.
Have they no refuge or resource?
Are there no prisons? Are there no workhouses?
Bong,
The bell struck 12.
bong, bong, bong,
Scrooge looked about him for the ghost
bong,
and saw it not.
bong.
As the last stroke ceased to vibrate, he remembered the prediction of old Jacob Marley.
And lifting up his eyes, beheld a solemn phantom draped and hooded.
Coming like a mist along the ground toward him.
The phantom slowly, gravely, silently approached.
When it came near him, Scrooge bent down upon his knee. For the very air through which this spirit moved, it seemed to scatter gloom and misery.
It was shrouded in a deep black garment, which concealed its head, its face, its form, and left nothing of it visible save one outstretched hand.
Its mysterious presence filled him with a solemn dread. He knew no more, for the spirit neither spoke nor moved.
I am in the presence of the ghost of Christmas yet to come,
Said Scrooge.
The spirit answered not, but pointed onward with its hand.
You are about to show me the shadows of things that have not happened, but will happen in the time before us. Is that so, Spirit?
The upper portion of the garment was contracted for an instant in its folds, and if the spirit had inclined its head, that was the only answer he received.
Although well used to ghostly company by this time, Scrooge feared the silent shape so much that his legs trembled beneath him, and he found that he could hardly stand when he prepared to follow it.
The spirit paused a moment, observing his condition, giving him time to recover.
Ghost of the future, I fear you more than any spectre I have seen. But as I know your purpose is to do me good, and as I hope to live to be another man from what I was, I am prepared to bear you company, and do it with a thankful heart. Will you not speak to me?
It gave him no reply. The hand was pointed straight before them.
Lead on, lead on. The night is waiting fast, and it is precious time to me, I know. Lead on.
They scarcely seemed to enter the city, for the city rather seemed to spring up about them and encompass them in its own act. But there were many in the heart of it.
The spirit stopped beside one little knot of businessmen.
Observing that the hand was pointed to them, Scrooge advanced to listen to their talk.
No,
Said a great fat man with a monstrous chin.
I don't know much about it either way. I know he did.
When did he die?
Inquired another.
Last night, I believe.
Why? What's the matter with him? I thought he'd never die.
Oh, God knows.
What's he done with his money?
Oh, I haven't heard. He left it to his company, perhaps? Hadn't left it to me, that's all I know.
Well, it's likely to be a very cheap funeral, for upon my life, I don't know of anybody to go to it.
He knew these men also perfectly. They were men of business, very wealthy, and of great importance.
He had made a point always of standing well in their esteem, in a business point of view, that is, strictly in a business point of view.
Scrooge was at first inclined to be surprised that the spirit should attach importance to conversations apparently so trivial. But feeling assured that they must have some hidden purpose, he set himself to consider what it was likely to be.
They could scarcely suppose to have had any bearing on the death of Jacob, his old partner, for that was past, and this ghost's province was the future.
They left this busy scene and went to an obscure part of the town, to a low shop where iron, old rags, bottles, bones, and greasy offal were bought.
A gray-haired rascal of great age sat smoking his pipe.
Scrooge the Phantom came into the presence of this man, just as a woman with a heavy bundle slunk into the shop.
But she had scarcely entered when another woman, similarly laden, came in too, and she was closely followed by a man in faded black. After a short period of blank astonishment in which the old man with the pipe had joined them, they all three burst into a laugh.
Well, let the tall woman alone to be the first.
Cried she who had entered first.
Wanders alone to be the second, and let the undertaker alone to be the third. Look here, oh Joe, here's a chance. If we haven't all three met here without meaning it.
Well, you couldn't have met in a better place. You were made free of it long ago, you know. The other two ain't strangers. What have you got to sell? What have you got to sell?
The woman threw her bundle on the floor and sat down in a flaunting manner on a stool, crossing her elbows on her knees and looking with a bold defiance at the other two.
What odds, Mrs. Dilber? Every person has a right to take care of themselves. Always did. Who's the worse for loss of few things like these? I'm a dead man, I suppose.
Mrs. Dilber, whose manner was remarkable for general propitiation, said,
Now indeed, if he wanted to keep him after he was dead, a wicked old screw, why wasn't he natural in his lifetime? If he had been, he'd have had somebody to look after him when he was struck with death, instead of lying, gasping out his last there alone by himself.
Oh, it's the truest word that ever was spoken. It's a judgment on him.
I wish it were a little heavier judgment, and it should have been, you may depend upon it, if I could have laid my hands on anything else.
Open it, little Joe, and let me know what the value of it is. Speak out plain. I'm not afraid to be the first, nor afraid for them to see.
We know pretty well that we were helping ourselves before we met here. I believe it's no sin. Open the bundle, Joe.
Joe went down on his knees for the greater convenience of opening the bundle and dragged out a large and heavy roll of some dark stuff.
What do you call this? Bed curtains?
Big curtains.
You don't mean to say you took them down, rings and all, within buying that?
Well, you were born to make your fortune, and you'll certainly do it.
That shirt? You might look through that shirt till your eyes ache, and you won't find a hole in it, not a threadbare place. It's the best he had. Fine one, too. They'd have wasted it if it hadn't been for me.
What do you call wasting of it?
Wouldn't warn him. To be buried in, to be sure. Somebody was fool enough to do it, but I don't know. Calico ain't good enough for such a purpose. It ain't good enough for anything. Why does it come into the body? And you can't look uglier than he did in that one.
Scrooge listened to this dialogue in horror.
He viewed them with a detestation and disgust which he could hardly have been greater, though they had been obscene demons marketing the corpse itself.
Spirit,
Said Scrooge, shuddering from head to foot.
I see. The case of this unhappy man might be my own. My life heads that way now. Merciful heaven, what is this?
The scene had changed, and now he almost touched a bare, uncurtained bed.
A pale light rising in the outer air fell straight upon this bed, and on it, unwatched, unwept, uncared for, was the body of this plundered, unknown man.
Spirit, let me see some tenderness connected with a death, or this dark chamber, Spirit, will be forever present to me.
The ghost conducted him through several streets familiar to his feet, and as they went along, Scrooge looked here and there to find himself, but nowhere was he to be seen.
They entered poor Bob Cratchit's house, the dwelling he had visited before, and found the mother and the children seated by the fire.
Quiet. Very quiet.
The noisy little Cratchits were as still as statues in one corner, and sat looking up at Peter, who had a book before him.
The mother and her daughters were engaged in sewing.
But surely they were very quiet.
And he took a child and set it in the midst of them.
Where had Scrooge heard those words? He had not dreamed them.
The boy must have read them out as he in spirit crossed the threshold. But why did he not go on?
The mother laid her work upon the table and put her hand up to her face.
Color hurts my eyes.
She said,
Color. Poor Tiny Tim.
You're better now. It makes them weak by candlelight, and I wouldn't show weak eyes to your father when he comes home to the world. It must be near his time.
Past it, rather.
Peter answered, shutting up his book.
But I think he's walked a little slower than he used these few days, last few evenings, Mother.
I have known him walk with Tiny Tim upon his shoulder very fast indeed.
So have I, often.
And so have I, exclaimed another. So had all.
But he was very light to carry, and his father loved him so that it was no trouble. There was your father at the door.
She hurried out to meet him, and little Bob and his comforter, he had needed it, poor fellow, came in. His tea was ready for him on the hob, and they all tried who should help him to it most.
Then the two young Cratchits got upon his knees and laid each child a little cheek against his face, as if they said, "Don't mind it, Father. Don't be grieved."
Bob was very cheerful with them, and he spoke pleasantly to all the family.
He looked at the work upon the table and praised the industry and speed of Mrs. Cratchit and the girls. It would be done long before Sunday, he said.
Sunday? You went today then, Robert?
Said his wife.
Yes, my dear. I wish you could have gone. It would have done you good to see how green a place it is. But you'll see it often. I promised him that I would walk there on a Sunday. My little child. My little child.
He broke down all at once. He couldn't help it. If he could have helped it, he and his child would have been further apart perhaps than they were.
Spectre,
Said Scrooge.
something informs me that our parting moment is at hand, I know. But I know not how. Tell me what man that was whom we saw lying dead.
A churchyard.
Here then, the wretched man whose name he had now to learn lay underneath the ground. It was a worthy place, walled in by houses overrun by grass and weeds, the growth of vegetation's death, not life, choked up with too much burying, fat with repeated appetite. A worthy place.
The spirits stood among the graves and pointed down to one.
Before I draw nearer to that stone to which you point, answer me one question. Are these the shadows of things that will be, or are they the shadows of things that may be only?
Still the ghost pointed downward to the grave by which it stood.
Men's courses will foreshadow certain ends, to which, if persevered in, they must lead. But if those courses be departed from, the end will change. Say it is thus with what you show me.
The spirit was immovable as ever.
Scrooge crept toward it, trembling as he went, and followed the finger read upon the stone of the neglected grave. His own name, Ebenezer Scrooge.
I am that man who lay upon the bed.
He cried upon his knees.
The finger pointed from the grave to him and back again.
No, Spirit, oh no!
The finger was still there.
Spirit, hear me. I am not the man I was. I will not be the man I must have been but before this intercourse. Why? Why show me this if I am past all hope?
For the first time, the hand appeared to shake.
Good Spirit,
He pursued, and down upon the ground he fell before it.
your nature intercedes for me. It pities me, assures me that I may yet change these shadows you have shown me by an altered life.
The kind hand trembled.
I will honor Christmas in my heart and try to keep it all the year. I will live in the past, the present, and the future. The spirits of all three shall strive within me. I will not shut out the lessons that they teach. Oh, tell me I may smudge away the writing on this stone.
In his agony, he caught the spectral hand. It sought to free itself, but he was strong in his entreaty and detained it. The spirit, stronger yet, repulsed him.
Holding up his hands in a last prayer to have his faith reversed, he saw an alteration in the phantom's hood and dress.
It shrunk, collapsed, and dwindled down into a bedpost.
Yes, and the bedpost was his own, and the bed was his own, and the room was his own.
Best and happiest of all, the time before him was his own, to make amends in.
I will live in the past, the present, and the future.
Scrooge repeated as he scrambled out of bed.
The spirits of all three shall strive within me. Oh, Jacob Marley, heaven and Christmas time be praised for this. I say it on my knees, old Jacob, on my knees.
He was so fluttered and so glowing with his good intentions that his broken voice would scarcely answer to his call.
He had been sobbing violently in his conflict with the spirit, and his face was wet with tears.
They are not torn down.
Cried Scrooge, holding one of his bed curtains in his arms.
They are not torn down. Rings it all. They are here. I am here. The shadows of things that would have been may be dispelled. They will be dispelled. I know they will.
Oh, his hands were busy with his garments all this time turning them inside out, putting them on upside down, tearing them, mislaying them, making them parties to every kind of extravagance.
I don't know what to do. I'm as light as a feather. I'm as happy as an angel. I'm as merry as a schoolboy. I'm as giddy as a drunken man. Oh, a Merry Christmas, everybody. A Happy New Year to all the world. Hello here. Hello. Whoa, hello.
He had frisked into the sitting room, which was now standing there perfectly winded.
He was checked in his transport by the churches ringing out the lustiest peals he had ever heard.
Clash, clang, hammer, ding, ding. Clash, clang,
Glorious, glorious.
Running to the window, he opened it and put out his head.
No fog, no mist.
clear, bright, jovial, stirring cold.
Cold, piping for the blood to dance to.
Golden sunlight, heavenly skies, sweet fresh air, and merry bells.
Oh, glorious!
Glorious.
Oh, what's today?
Cried Scrooge, calling downward to a boy in Sunday clothes who perhaps had loitered in to look about.
I?
Returned the boy with all his might of wonder.
Oh, what's today, my fine fellow?
That's Christmas Day.
It's Christmas Day. I haven't missed it. The spirits have done it all in one night. Oh, they can do anything they like. Of course they can. Of course they can. Well, hello, my fine fellow.
Hello.
Do you know the Poltos in the next street, but one at the corner?
I should hope I do.
Oh, an intelligent boy, a remarkable boy. Do you know whether they sold the prize turkey that was hanging up there? Oh, not the little prize turkey, mind you, the big one.
The one whose name is mine.
What a delightful boy! Just a pleasure to talk to you. Yes, my buck.
And then now.
It is. Well, go and buy it.
Oh, God.
No, I am in earnest. Go and buy it, and tell them to bring it here, and they give them the direction where to take it. Come back with the man, and I'll give you a shilling. Come back with it in less than 5 minutes, and I'll give you half a crown.
The boy was off like a shot. He must have had a steady hand at the trigger who could have got a shot off half so fast.
I'll send it to Bob Cratchit's. He shan't know who sent it. It's twice the size of Tiny Tim.
The hand in which he wrote the address was not a steady one, but write it he did somehow, and went downstairs to open the street door, ready for the coming of the poulterer's man.
Oh, it was a turkey. Never could have stood upon his legs, that bird. He would have snapped them off in short time, like sticks of sealing wax.
Why, it's impossible to carry that to Camden Town. You must have a cow.
The chuckle with which he said this,
And the chuckle with which he paid for the turkey.
And the chuckle with which he paid for the cat.
and the chuckle with which he recompensed the boy,
Were only to be exceeded by the chuckle with which he sat down breathless in his chair again.
and chuckled till he cried.
He dressed himself all in his best, and at last got out into the streets.
The people were by this time pouring forth, as he had seen them with the ghost of Christmas present.
And walking with his hands behind him, Scrooge regarded everyone with a delighted smile.
He looked so irresistibly pleasant, in a word, that 3 or 4 good-humored fellows said,
"Good morning, sir. Merry Christmas to you."
And Scrooge said often afterwards that of all the blithe sounds he has ever heard, those were the blithest in his ears.
He went to church and walked about the
And
streets,
watched the people hurrying to and fro.
And he patted children on the head and questioned beggars.
and looked down into the kitchens of houses and up to the windows.
And found that everything could yield him pleasure.
He had never dreamed that any walk, that anything could give him so much happiness.
In the afternoon, he turned his steps toward his nephew's house.
He passed the door a dozen times before he had the courage to get up and knock. But he made a dash and did it.
Is your master at home, my dear?
Said Scrooge to the girl. Nice girl, very.
Yes, sir.
Where is he, my love?
Oh, he's in the dining room, sir, along with mistress. I'll show you upstairs if you please.
Thank you. He knows me.
Said Scrooge with his hand already on the dining room lock.
I'll go in here, my dear.
He turned it gently, sidled his face in round the door.
Fred!
Why, bless my soul!
Cried Fred.
Who's that?
It's I, your Uncle Scrooge. I have come to dinner. Will you let me in, Fred?
Let him in. It's a mercy he didn't shake his arm off.
He was at home in 5 minutes. Nothing could have been heartier.
Wonderful party, wonderful games.
Wonderful unanimity, wonderful happiness.
But he was early at the office next morning. Oh, he was early there.
If he could get there first, and to catch Bob Cratchit coming late, that was the thing he had his heart set on.
He did it. Yes, he did. The clock struck 9. No Bob.
A quarter past. No Bob.
He was a full 18 minutes and a half past his time.
Scrooge sat with his door wide open that he might see him coming into the tank.
His hat was off before he opened the door. His comforter, too.
He was on his stool in a jiffy, driving away with his pen as if he were trying to overtake 9 o'clock.
Hello?
growled Scrooge in his accustomed voice, as near as he could feign it.
What do you mean coming in here at this time of day?
Oh, I'm very sorry, sir. I am behind my time.
You are? Oh, yes. Yes, I think you are. Step this way, sir, if you please.
It's only once a year, sir.
Little Bob appearing from the tank.
It shall not be repeated. I was making rather merry yesterday, sir.
Now I'll tell you what, my friend. I am not going to stand for this sort of thing any longer, and therefore...
He continued leaping from his stool and giving Bob such a dig in the waistcoat that he staggered back into the tank.
And therefore, I am about to raise your salary.
Bob trembled and got a little nearer to the ruler.
He had a momentary idea of knocking Scrooge down with it, holding him, and calling to the people in the court for help in a straight waistcoat.
Merry, Merry Christmas,
Said
Bob.
Scrooge with an earnestness that could not be mistaken as he clapped him on the back.
A merrier Christmas, Bob, my good fellow, than I have given you for many, many a year. I shall raise your salary and endeavor to assist your struggling family, and we will discuss your affairs this very afternoon over a Christmas bowl of smoky bishop, Bob. Make up the fires and buy another coal scuttle before you dot another I, Bob Cratchit.
Scrooge was better than his word. He did it all, and infinitely more.
And to Tiny Tim, who did not die, he was a second father.
He became as good a friend, a good a master, and as good a man as the good old city knew, or any other good old city, town, or borough in the good old world.
Some people laughed to see the alteration in him, but he let them laugh, and little heeded them.
For he was wise enough to know that nothing ever happened in this globe for good, at which some people did not have their fill of laughter in the outset.
And knowing that such as these would be blind anyway, he thought quite as well that they should wrinkle up their noses in grins as had the malady in less attractive forms.
His own heart laughed, and that was quite enough for him.
He had no further intercourse with spirits, and it was always said of him that he who knew how to keep Christmas well, if any man alive ever possessed the knowledge.
May that be true of us, and all of us.
And so, as Tiny Tim observed, God bless us